Japan has been the site of some iconic moments and tracks during its long stint on the F1 calendar, from the meandering action of Sazuka circuit to the jaw-dropping silhouette of Mount Fuji in Oyama. And with the Japanese Grand Prix just around the corner, what better way to get everyone in the mood for the race than to reminisce about the most intense and downright insane moments in its history. So buckle up, because we're about to dive right in. 1988, Senna's comeback masterclass. Ayrton Senna arrived at the 1988 Japanese Grand Prix, the season's penultimate race, knowing that victory would secure his first world title. The Brazilian maestro duly won pole. But at the start of the race, his McLaren stalled, leaving him frantically waving his arms in the air as teammate and title rival Alain Prost took the lead. Senna was fortunate that Sazuka's grid was on a downhill, and as the field swarmed past him on either side, he was able to expertly bump start his Honda-powered machine into life. Then, the charge began. By lap 14, he'd climbed from 14th to 3rd, and after a brief rain shower that allowed him to demonstrate his natural ability in tricky conditions, he was right on Prost's tail. On lap 28, the Frenchman could no longer keep his unstoppable teammate at bay, and Senna swept majestically into the lead down the pit straight. Victory and the championship were his. Until today, I always said my best drive was at Estoril in 1985, said Senna afterwards. But not anymore. This was my best. 1976. Huntlands title as Lauda pulls out. The 1976 Formula One World Championship had witnessed everything. Niki Lauda's nightmare accident in Germany and a late-season charge by James Hunt. It all came down to the season's final race, one for the history books. The 1976 race at Fuji was more than just the first World Championship Grand Prix held in Japan. It was also the final race of a dramatic and turbulent season. After being read the last rites following his fiery crash at the Nürburgring, Lauda missed only 2 races, but was still not back to his best. Hunt, on the other hand, appeared unstoppable. With 3 victories in the previous 4 races, he was only 3 points behind the Austrian entering the final round in Japan. Niki was in a reflective mood before the race. Sure, he wanted to win the championship, but he was also relieved to be alive. Hunt, on the other hand, was determined to win at any cost. "I'm really sorry for Niki, but this is probably the best chance I'll ever have to win the championship," the Brit said before the race. And Hunt's actions spoke louder than his words, as it was the McLaren driver that would ultimately triumph. In appalling weather conditions, Hunt finished a tenacious 3rd, while Lauda, understandably frazzled, was one of several drivers to withdraw from the race. "It's just like murder out there," the Ferrari driver said. "I'm not going to do it. Sometimes I could not tell which direction the car was going. For me, it was the limit. For me, there is something more important than the World Championship." 1989. Prost and Senna clash. The 1989 race at Sazuka had a sense of déjà vu as the McLaren duo of Senna and Prost once more arrived locked in battle for the driver's title. The Brazilian took pole, but the Frenchman, who had the advantage in the championship, took the lead from the start. So, just like the previous year, Senna would have to pass his great rival and teammate. Prost, however, was in no mood to let his teammate through this time. On lap 46, as Senna lunged down the inside approaching the chicane, Prost turned into the Brazilian, causing the cars to lock wheels and come to a halt. While Prost immediately jumped out of his stricken MP45, Senna begged the marshals for help and rejoined the race. After a quick pit stop to replace a front wing, the Brazilian roared back, passing Benetton's Alessandro Nannini for the lead and presumably the race victory. But before he could even make his way to the podium, Senna was disqualified in hugely controversial circumstances for cutting the chicane. Prost was the champion, but that would not be the end of the story. 2012, home hero Kobayashi. Japanese drivers had previously starred on some soil, but neither Aguri Suzuki, who took advantage of several retirements in the 1990 race to score his country's first podium, nor Takuma Sato, who finished a tenacious 6th in 2003, were able to overcome such formidable opposition as Kobayashi in 2012. In qualifying, the combative Sauber driver upset the likes of Fernando Alonso, Lewis Hamilton, and Kimi Raikkonen to record the 4th quickest time, which became 3rd on the grid when McLaren's Jenson Button took a gearbox penalty. "I've always felt that if you ever want to look back and regard yourself as a Formula One driver, you have to have been on the podium at least once," said Kobayashi after claiming Japan's first home podium in 22 years. "Without such a photo, it's a bit as if you had never been there. So it means a lot to me." 1990, Prost and Senna clash, part 2. Unbelievably, Senna and Prost arrived at Sazuka in 1990, locked in a battle for the World Championship for the third year in a row. They were in different teams by this point, as Prost had left Mclaren for Ferrari, but their rivalry was no less heated. Keeping with tradition, the two drivers qualified on the front row of the grid, but unlike the previous year, the fireworks began almost as soon as the start lights went out. Senna, still enraged by the injustice of his pole position slot being moved from the clean to the dirty side of the grid, was predictably beaten into the first corner by Prost's scarlet car. But the Frenchman wouldn't be able to keep the lead for long. I promised myself that if after the start I lost first place, I would go for it at the first corner, regardless of the result, Senna would later say. The Brazilian's uncompromising line and daring move would result in contact and both men being eliminated on the spot. Senna was crowned champion, but not in less contentious circumstances than the previous year. Being a racing driver means you are racing with other people, and if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you are no longer a racing driver because we are competing. The Brazilian said enough. 1998, Hakkinen clinches first world title. In 1998, for the seventh time in 12 years, the world champion was crowned at Sazuka. This time it was McLaren's Mika Hakkinen, who triumphed after seeing off the challenge of arch-rival Michael Schumacher. It could have been very different if Schumacher, who qualified on pole, had not stalled at the start. This pushed the Ferrari driver to the back of the field, relieved pressure from Hakkinen, and provided the Finn with a relatively easy path to victory. Schumacher, aiming for Ferrari's first world driver's title since 1979, tried his hardest to get back into the race, but he was undone by a dramatic right rear tire puncture while running around 25 seconds behind Hakkinen in third. "It's a shame, but the world keeps turning," was Michael Schumacher's conclusion as he tried to emphasize the positive aspects. "At the beginning of the season, I would never have said I was there to challenge McLaren in the last race." 2011. Two legends, two triumphs. 2011 was a memorable race for several reasons. First, Jenson Button claimed a brilliant victory, while Sebastian Vettel did enough to wrap up his second title with a third-place finish. Button was the only driver who could still mathematically win the championship going into the race, but he needed to win and Vettel not to score for it to go to Korea. It was highly unlikely, but the McLaren driver gave it his all to take what he claimed to be his best ever victory. It was a big statement, especially how he won the Canadian Grand Prix earlier in the year, but in a country he adores, it was easy to see why. It held off charging Fernando Alonso in the final laps while trying to save fuel, with a winning margin just over 1 second. Meanwhile, Vettel qualified on pole, but struggled with tire wear during the race, forcing him to settle for third place on the podium. He was 2 seconds behind Button at the finish line, but had done enough to win the championship in dominant fashion with 4 races left in the season. The 2011 race was notable for another reason as well. It was the first international sporting event to visit the country in the aftermath of the devastating tsunami and subsequent Fukushima nuclear disaster. The ever-passionate Japanese fans let their appreciation known all weekend. 2000. Schumacher ends Ferrari slump. Having missed his chance to become Ferrari's first world champion since Jody Scheckter in 1979, when he was defeated by Mika Hakkinen at Suzuka in 1998, Michael Schumacher was determined not to let history repeat itself in 2000. The German left nothing to chance in qualifying, beating title rival Hakkinen to pole by 9,000th of a second, and things were just as close in the race. Hakkinen got the jump and led the early running, but when it began to rain near the end, Schumacher closed in on the Finn. The Ferrari driver dropped the hammer when Hakkinen made his second and final stop, and by the time he made his own stop 3 laps later, he had enough in hand to emerge ahead of the McLaren driver. From then on, Schumacher maintained his lead, eventually crossing the line 1.8 seconds ahead of Hakkinen, setting off jubilant scenes on the podium with Ferrari team principal Jean Todt. For Ferrari, 21 years of hurt were over. For Schumacher, what followed was his worst hangover ever. Looking back, I have to say that this race was something very special for me. Not only because it brought me the title, but also because it was such a high-class race. It really was racing at its top level. For over 40 laps, Mika and I did almost identical times, like a perpetual qualifying lap. It was certainly one of the best races I have ever driven, if not the best. Mika was fantastic and pushed me to the very limits. I have never suffered so badly after a party. From Japan, we went on holiday to Thailand, and it took me 2 days to get over the after effects. 2005, Raikkonen wins with last lap pass. 1 lap qualifying wasn't for everyone, but it did contribute to one of the greatest Grand Prix in modern F1 history. Kimi Raikkonen of McLaren was one of the pre-race favorites at Sazuka in 2005, but a rain shower midway through Saturday's one-at-a-time session meant the Finn, who was one of the last to take to the track, finished 17th on the grid. Raikkonen, undeterred, took off like a rocket at the start of Sunday's race, surging to 12th by the end of a thrilling first lap. The McLaren driver continued to climb the order as the race progressed, and after his final pit stop 8 laps from the finish, Raikkonen was only 5.4 seconds behind race leader Giancarlo Fisichella's Renault. He couldn't possibly catch the Italian, could he? He certainly could. Raikkonen tucked in behind Fisichella's blue and yellow Renault as the pair entered the final lap. The Italian held the inside lane into the ultra-fast turn 1, only for the Finn to sweep around the outside and into first place. A little over a minute later, Raikkonen completed a famous victory. 2018, Vettel clashes with Verstappen. In his relatively short F1 career to date, Max Verstappen has gone toe-to-toe with the Ferraris of Sebastian Vettel and Kimi Raikkonen on numerous occasions. And in Sazuka on Sunday, the old sparring partners were at it again, resulting in more broken carbon fiber and more finger-pointing. Sebastian Vettel's 2018 season was critical because he was vying for the championship with Mercedes' Lewis Hamilton. The Briton, however, had a far superior car and was well ahead of the field by the time F1 arrived at Sazuka. Vettel struggled in qualifying, finishing 9th due to a strategic error by Ferrari. But the German had a strong start to the race, thanks to a collision between Raikkonen and Verstappen. After the safety car period ended due to a harsh accident, Vettel attempted a daring move on Verstappen. He would soon grow to regret it. As he tried to overtake from the inside going into the fast double left-hander of Spoon, Vettel ultimately made light contact with Max Verstappen and spun off into the AstroTurf. For many fans, it was a shocking moment, the Germans' championship contention unraveling itself in front of everyone's eyes. The Verstappen-Vettel drama concludes our list. Are there any insane Japanese Grand Prix moments you wish you could have witnessed from the stands? Let us know in the comments. And if you liked the video, be sure to like and subscribe. Also, if you want to be notified when we upload new videos, click the bell icon.